The rain fell in a fine mist over the great scrapyard, coating everything in a slick sheen that reflected the distant lights of Neoviridia. Cale pulled his weathered coat tighter around his shoulders as he picked his way through mountains of discarded technology. The great scrapyard stretched for miles along the outskirts of the metropolis, a graveyard for the city's obsolete machines, broken dreams, and forgotten innovations. This was Cale's hunting ground. The 30-year-old former mechanical engineer had made a home here, far from the gleaming spires and artificial suns of Neoviridia proper. His workshop, cobbled together from shipping containers and salvage materials, stood as a testament to his ingenuity and his desire to remain unseen. Today's scavenging had been moderately successful. His pack contained several microprocessors that still held charge, copper wiring in decent condition, and a small power converter that would work perfectly in his latest project. The weight of the components felt reassuring against his back as he began the journey home through the labyrinth of metal and plastic. A sudden gust of wind carried a sound to him, faint and unfamiliar against the backdrop of creaking metal and distant industrial hums. Cale paused, head tilted, listening. There was again a sound that didn't belong among the inanimate debris of the scrapyard. Curiosity piqued. He changed course, following the noise deeper into a section of the scrapyard he rarely visited. The piles grew taller here, more precarious, with shipping containers stacked haphazardly atop one another. The sound grew clearer, a weak, rhythmic wheezing, almost like labored breathing. Cale approached a partially collapsed stack of containers, their once bright colors now faded to rust and decay. The sound was coming from inside the bottom container, emanating from a jagged hole torn in its side. Drawing the small light from his belt, Cale crouched beside the opening and peered inside. The beam cut through shadows, revealing something that made Cale's breath catch in his throat. Curled on the floor of the container lay a figure, humanoid, but unlike any human he had ever seen. It was a young woman, or at least she had the general form of one. Her skin was pale with a subtle shimmer, bearing what looked like faint, iridescent scales and patches. A small tail, no longer than his forearm, curled weakly around her legs. Most striking were the vestigial protrusions on her forehead, small, nub-like structures that resembled the beginnings of horns. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. Her body showed signs of malnourishment and dehydration. There were old burn marks on her arms and shoulders, and around her wrist was a strange metal band etched with symbols Cale didn't recognize. For a long moment, Cale remained frozen in place, his mind racing. Whoever this was, she wasn't human. The rational part of his brain urged caution. Getting involved would mean trouble, and Cale had spent years meticulously avoiding trouble. But as he watched her chest rise and fall with each labored breath, another part of him, a part he thought he'd buried long ago when he walked away from his old life, stirred to life. She would die here, alone and forgotten among the refuse, if no one helped her. Damn it, he muttered, already knowing what he would do. With careful movements, Cale enlarged the opening in the container and maneuvered inside. The girl didn't stir as he approached. Up close, her features appeared more human. High cheekbones, a delicate nose, closed eyelids that occasionally fluttered. But the scales that shimmered faintly along her hairline and down her neck confirmed his initial impression. He reached out slowly and pressed 2 fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but weak and erratic. Making his decision, Cale gently slid his arms beneath her slight form and lifted. She weighed less than he expected, her body frightfully light from what must have been weeks of starvation. "I've got you," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The journey back to his workshop was arduous. Cale stuck to the shadows, taking circuitous routes to avoid the few other scavengers who might be around at this hour. The girl didn't wake during the trip, though occasionally she would murmur unintelligible sounds or twitch in his arms. By the time Cale reached his workshop, the misting rain had soaked through his coat, and his muscles ached from carrying her. He shouldered open the reinforced door and entered the space that had been his home for the past 5 years. The interior of the workshop was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Though cramped, it was meticulously organized. Shelves lined the walls, filled with salvage parts sorted by type and utility. A workbench dominated one side, covered in half-completed projects and precision tools. In the corner stood his sleeping area, a simple cot with storage underneath. A small kitchen and bathroom had been ingeniously fitted into the limited space. Cale laid the girl carefully on his cot and went to work. He gathered water, the few medical supplies he kept on hand, and some synthetic protein cubes, the bland but nutritious food that was standard fare in the outer zones of Neoviridia. He cleaned her wounds first, noticing that some were recent while others were old scars. The metal band on her wrist seemed fused to her skin in places, and he decided against attempting to remove it for now. Instead, he focused on hydration, carefully dripping water between her parched lips. As he worked, Cale's mind wandered to his past, to the sleek laboratories of Nexus Corp, where he had once been a rising star in mechanical engineering. He remembered the day he discovered what his designs were really being used for, the confrontation with his superiors, and his subsequent decision to disappear into the margins of society rather than be complicit in their weapons programs. Those memories seemed distant now as he tended to this strange being who had fallen into his life. Whatever she was, wherever she had come from, she needed help. And for the first time in years, Cale found himself responsible for something more important than his own survival. Hours passed. The girl's breathing stabilized, and some color returned to her face. Cale had moved to his workbench, examining the strange symbols on her wristband through his magnification lens, when a sound from the cot made him turn. She was awake, and she was terrified. The girl pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide and darting around the unfamiliar space. When her gaze landed on Cale, she made a sound, part growl, part whimper, and her body tensed as if preparing to fight or flee. Cale raised his hands slowly, palms out. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here. I found you in the scrapyard. You were hurt. I brought you here to help you." His words seemed to mean nothing to her. She responded with a series of sounds that bore no resemblance to any language Cale had ever heard. Her eyes, he noticed now, were extraordinary, violet with flecks of gold that seemed to shift and glow in the dim light of the workshop. Cale tried again, speaking slowly and gesturing to the water and food he had prepared. "You need to eat, to drink. You're safe here." The girl watched him warily, but made no move toward the offerings. Instead, she examined her surroundings with quick, nervous glances. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed back onto the cot with a frustrated cry. Cale approached cautiously, offering the water. "Please," he said, miming drinking. "You need this." After a long moment of hesitation, the girl reached for the container with trembling hands. She sniffed it suspiciously before taking a small sip. Her eyes widened, and she began to drink desperately until Cale gently pulled the container away. "Slowly," he cautioned, demonstrating with gestures. "Too much too quickly will make you sick." Understanding seemed to dawn in her eyes, and she nodded slightly, accepting the water back and sipping more carefully this time. It was a small victory, but Cale felt a surprising surge of relief. Over the next few hours, a tenuous routine developed. The girl accepted food and more water, watching Cale's every move with cautious curiosity. Though they couldn't communicate with words, a rudimentary understanding began to form through gestures and expressions. As night fell outside, Cale fashioned a second sleeping area for himself on the floor, leaving the cot for his unexpected guest. Before settling down, he pointed to himself and said clearly, "Cale." The girl tilted her head, considering. After a moment, she pointed to him and repeated, "Cale," her pronunciation slightly off but recognizable. He nodded encouragingly, then gestured to her with a questioning look. She stared back, seemingly confused by the query. Cale realized she might not understand the concept of names, or perhaps she couldn't remember her own. On impulse, he looked up at the small skylight in the ceiling of his workshop, where a few stars were visible through the perpetual haze that hung over Neoviridia. Lyra, he said, pointing to her. The name of a constellation his father had taught him long ago seemed fitting for this star-eyed stranger. The girl followed his gaze to the stars, then looked back at him. Lyra, she repeated softly, placing a hand on her chest. Then again, more firmly, Lyra, as if accepting the gift of identity he had offered her. In the days that followed, Lyra grew stronger. Her body began to recover from the starvation and dehydration, though she remained thin and easily fatigued. Cale continued his scavenging, but kept his trips brief, uncomfortable with leaving her alone for too long. Communication remained their greatest challenge, though Lyra proved remarkably intelligent. She began to mimic Cale's words, quickly learning basic terms for objects around the workshop. Her voice, once she began to use it more, had a musical quality that made even the simplest words sound like fragments of a forgotten melody. Cale found himself both fascinated and puzzled by his guest. In quiet moments, he would study her when she wasn't looking. The way her scales caught the light, the graceful movements of her small tail, the horn-like protrusions that seemed to have darkened and grown slightly since her arrival. She was alien, yet there was something hauntingly familiar in her expressions and mannerisms. The metal band on her wrist remained a mystery. Cale had determined it was some sort of tracking or identification device, but its technology was unlike anything he had encountered before. It appeared damaged, with several of its embedded lights dark and its surface cracked in places. He wondered if its malfunction had something to do with Lyra's presence in the scrapyard. One evening, as Cale worked on repairing a small drone at his bench, Lyra approached and watched intently. He had grown accustomed to her quiet observation and continued working, explaining his actions in simple terms as he often did, finding that it helped her language acquisition. "This circuit board connects to the power source," he said, demonstrating with his tools. "When it's damaged, like this one, the energy can't flow properly." Lyra nodded, then pointed to the soldering tool. "Hot," she said, one of the words she had learned early on. "Yes, very hot," Cale confirmed. "It melts the metal to create a bond." To his surprise, Lyra extended her hand over the broken circuit board. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and a soft glow began to emanate from her palm. Cale watched, astonished, as the temperature around her hand visibly rose, distorting the air. "Lyra, what are you?" Before he could finish, a small, controlled flame flickered to life in her palm. With surprising precision, she directed the heat to the exact point where Cale had been about to solder, melting the connection perfectly. When she withdrew her hand, the repair was complete, better than Cale could have done with his tools. She looked up at him with an uncertain smile, clearly seeking approval. Cale found himself speechless, staring at the repaired circuit and then at Lyra's unmarked palm. "That's incredible," he finally managed. "How did you do that?" Lyra's limited vocabulary couldn't express what was clearly an innate ability. Instead, she pointed to herself and then to the ceiling, to the stars beyond. That night, as Lyra slept, Cale stayed awake, his mind racing with questions. The implications of what he had witnessed were staggering. Lyra wasn't just physically different from humans. She possessed abilities that defied explanation. The flame she had produced wasn't like fire as he understood it. It had been controlled, precise, generated without fuel or a visible ignition source. He thought again of the metal band on her wrist, the old burn marks on her skin. Someone had known what she was, what she could do. Someone had kept her captive, perhaps tried to harness or suppress her abilities. And that someone might still be looking for her. The realization sent a chill through Cale. His isolated existence in the scrapyard had always been precarious, but relatively safe. Now, by bringing Lyra into his life, he had potentially exposed them both to unknown dangers. Yet as he watched her sleeping peacefully, her chest rising and falling, her tail occasionally twitching with dreams, Cale couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. Whatever came next, he would face it. He would protect her. The following days brought new developments in their strange cohabitation. Lyra's language skills improved rapidly, allowing for basic conversation. Through a combination of words, gestures, and drawings, She began to communicate fragments of memory, disjointed images of darkness, cold, pain, and pursuit. Bad place, she would say, eyes distant. Pain, many lights, many people in white. Scientists, Cale would ask, drawing a simple lab coat figure. Lyra would nod vigorously. Yes, they make tests, make pain. She would point to the band on her wrist. This controls. Cale shared bits of his own past in return. Simplified accounts of his work as an engineer, his disillusionment with Nexus Corp, his choice to live in the margins of society. Lyra listened attentively, occasionally asking questions with her growing vocabulary. Their routine was interrupted one afternoon by a massive crash from outside. The sound of metal collapsing against metal reverberated through the workshop. Lyra, who had been practicing writing letters on a salvage tablet, dropped the device with a startled cry. The sudden noise triggered something in her. Her eyes widened in terror. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, and her entire body began to tremble. Cale rushed to her, sighed, but before he could reach her, the temperature in the workshop spiked dramatically. Scales across Lyra's skin became more pronounced, taking on a metallic sheen. Her eyes blazed with golden light, and heat radiated from her body in palpable waves. A small metal cup on the table beside her began to soften and deform. Lyra, Cale called, fighting his instinct to back away from the intense heat. It's okay. It's just something falling in the scrapyard. It happens all the time. His voice seemed to reach through her panic. Lyra's gaze focused on him, recognition slowly returning to her eyes. The heat diminished gradually, and the golden glow faded. She looked at the melted cup, then back to Cale with horror. Sorry, she whispered. I not control when afraid. Cale approached carefully and sat beside her. It's okay, he said gently. You didn't hurt anyone. But this, what you can do, it's why someone was keeping you captive, isn't it? Lyra nodded slowly. They want weapon. They make me do things, burn things. She touched the band on her wrist. This makes pain if I not do what they say. The revelation hit Cale like a physical blow. Someone had been using Lyra, torturing her, attempting to weaponize her natural abilities. And if they discovered she had escaped, they would undoubtedly try to reclaim their asset. That night, Cale made a difficult decision. He needed more information, and that meant reaching out to contacts he had avoided for years. There was risk involved, but remaining ignorant was becoming the greater danger. The next day, while Lyra practiced reading from one of Cale's old engineering manuals, he slipped away to a different part of the scrapyard. In a forgotten maintenance shed, he activated a battered communications device he had salvaged and modified long ago. Using encrypted channels known only to a select few, Cale connected with a former colleague, a data diver, who now made her living extracting information from secure networks. He sent images of the symbols on Lyra's wristband, carefully anonymized, requesting any information about their origin or meaning. The response came faster than he had expected, and it was troubling. The symbols were associated with something called Project Chimera, a classified initiative run by Aegis Corp, a private military corporation known for its extreme approaches to weapons development and its disregard for ethical boundaries. According to his contact, Project Chimera had officially been shut down years ago after a catastrophic containment failure at one of their research facilities. Cale thanked his contact and terminated the connection, his mind reeling. Aegis Corp had a reputation that made even Nexus look benign by comparison. If they were behind Lyra's captivity, the danger was far greater than he had imagined. When he returned to the workshop, Lyra sensed his unease immediately. What wrong? She asked, setting aside the manual. Cale considered lying, protecting her from the truth, but decided against it. Lyra deserved honesty, especially when it concerned her own safety. I found out something about the people who might have held you captive, he explained carefully. A corporation called Aegis. They're dangerous, Lyra. Very dangerous. He watched understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by fear, then a steely resolve that surprised him. They find me? She asked. I don't know, Cale admitted. The device on your wrist seems damaged. That might be why they haven't tracked you here yet. But if they're looking, They looking, Lyra confirmed quietly. Always looking. That night, Cale began implementing additional security measures around his workshop. He rigged proximity sensors from salvaged parts, established multiple escape routes, and cached emergency supplies at strategic locations throughout the scrapyard. Lyra watched his preparations with solemn attention. When he explained each measure, she nodded gravely and memorized the details. There was something heartbreaking in her quick acceptance of their precarious situation, as if she had never expected safety to last. 3 days later, the sensors triggered. It was past midnight. Cale had been working late, attempting to analyze the wristband's technology without removing it from Lyra's arm. A soft, pulsing alert from his security system brought him instantly to alertness. "Lyra," he whispered urgently. "Wake up. Someone's approaching." She was awake immediately, eyes alert, body tense. Without needing instruction, she gathered the small emergency pack Cale had prepared for her while he checked the sensor readings. 3 individuals, he reported quietly, moving slowly, using scanning equipment. He activated a small monitor showing feeds from cameras hidden around the workshop's perimeter. The infrared image showed 3 figures in tactical gear, methodically sweeping the area with handheld devices. "Aegis," Lyra whispered, her voice tight with fear. Cale nodded grimly. "We need to leave. Now." He grabbed his own pack and led her to a concealed hatch in the floor. "This leads to a maintenance tunnel. It'll take us deeper into the scrapyard, away from them." They descended quickly into the narrow passage. Cale sealed the hatch behind them and activated a series of false electronic signatures he had prepared, decoys that would hopefully confuse the pursuers' scanning equipment long enough for them to gain distance. The tunnel was cramped and dark, illuminated only by the dim glow of Cale's portable light. They moved as quickly as silence would allow, Lyra following close behind him. Her night vision, Cale had discovered, was far superior to his own, and more than once she guided him around obstacles he couldn't see. After nearly an hour of tense progress, they emerged into a different section of the scrapyard, an area dominated by the hulking remains of industrial equipment. Here, the mountains of scrap rose like jagged citadels, creating a maze of shadowy canyons and hidden recesses. "We'll head for the edge of the scrapyard," Cale whispered. "There's an entrance to the Undercity there, maintenance tunnels, and old subway systems beneath Neo-Viridia. We can lose them in the network." Lyra nodded, but her attention was elsewhere, her head tilted as if listening to something Cale couldn't hear. "More coming," she said suddenly. From there, she pointed to their left, toward a gap between 2 massive piles of twisted metal. Cale didn't question her. They changed direction, moving right instead, deeper into the labyrinth of industrial remains. The night air was thick with humidity, muffling sounds, and limiting visibility, an advantage in their current situation. They had almost reached a promising hiding spot, the partially intact cabin of an enormous excavation machine, when lights suddenly blazed around them from multiple directions. "Halt!" commanded a voice amplified by tactical gear. "Remain where you are." Cale pulled Lyra behind the massive treads of the excavator as weapons were raised. He counted at least 6 Aegis operatives now, forming a loose perimeter around them. Their escape routes were cut off. "We have the asset cornered," one of them reported into a communications device, awaiting further instructions. Cale's mind raced, evaluating and discarding options. The Aegis team was well-equipped and trained. A direct confrontation would be suicidal. But surrender would mean returning Lyra to captivity and likely imprisonment or worse for himself. As if reading his thoughts, Lyra gripped his arm. "I fight," she whispered, her eyes beginning to take on that golden glow. "No," Cale hissed. "There are too many. You could lose control." Before they could debate further, a new figure approached, taller than the others, with an air of authority that was palpable even at a distance. The tactical team parted to make way as Commander Thorne strode forward, stopping just outside the range of their hiding place. "Asset Omega," he called, his voice cold and precise. "Your attempt to escape is both futile and irrational. You belong to Aegis Corp. Your purpose is to serve. Surrender now, and your punishment will be minimal." Beside Kale, Lyra's breathing quickened, and he could feel the temperature around them rising. Her fear and anger were triggering her abilities, and in the confined space, that could quickly become dangerous. "Listen to me," Kale whispered urgently. "I have an idea, but you need to trust me completely. Can you create a distraction, something bright and hot, but controlled, when I give the signal?" Lyra nodded, her expression determined despite her fear. Kale reached into his pack and extracted a small device he had built for emergencies, a localized electromagnetic pulse generator. It wouldn't disable all of their pursuers' equipment, but it might create enough chaos for an escape. "On my mark," he breathed. 3, 2, 1. Several things happened simultaneously. Kale activated the EMP device, sending a surge of energy outward that immediately darkened the Aegis team's lights and disrupted their communications. In the same instant, Lyra thrust both hands forward, releasing a concentrated blast of heat and light that momentarily blinded anyone looking in their direction. Taking advantage of the confusion, Kale grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward a narrow gap between scrap piles that he had identified earlier. They sprinted through the darkness, Lyra's natural night vision keeping them from stumbling as shouts and curses erupted behind them. After them, Thorn's voice commanded, "Use the backup systems. Don't lose the asset." They ran, ducking through tight spaces and navigating the treacherous terrain of the scrapyard by instinct and desperation. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew more organized as the Aegis team recovered from the initial confusion. "There!" Kale pointed to a dark opening at the base of a concrete retaining wall, one of the maintenance entrances to the Undercity. They had nearly reached it when a weapon fired, and something struck the ground near Kale's feet. The impact sent him sprawling, a sharp pain lancing through his leg as he fell. Lyra was at his side instantly. "Kale!" Her eyes widened at the sight of blood spreading across his pant leg. "Keep going," he gasped. "Get to the tunnel." "No!" Lyra's face hardened with determination. She looked back at their pursuers, now visible again and closing in rapidly. Her scales began to shimmer, and the air around her wavered with heat. No more running. Before Kale could stop her, Lyra stepped into the open, facing the approaching Aegis team. The transformation that followed was both beautiful and terrifying. Scales erupted across her skin in waves of iridescent color. The horn-like protrusions on her forehead extended, curving upward into small but unmistakable horns. Most dramatic of all, from her shoulder blades emerged the beginnings of wings, skeletal at first, then rapidly filling with membrane-like tissue that gleamed metallically in the dim light. Commander Thorn halted his advance, his expression shifting from confidence to shock. "Impossible," he breathed. The modifications were only theoretical. The alien DNA wasn't stable enough for full expression. Lyra raised her hands, and fire bloomed around her in a protective circle. This wasn't the controlled, focused heat she had used before. This was primal, powerful, a manifestation of rage and defiance that lit the scrapyard like daybreak. "No more cage," she said, her voice carrying a resonance that hadn't been there before. "No more pain." The Aegis team's weapons melted in their hands. Their tactical gear began to smoke. They retreated in disarray, all discipline forgotten in the face of power they had never witnessed before. Only Thorn stood his ground, his face contorted with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You don't understand what you are," he called to Lyra. "You're not just an experiment. You're Omega prototype, created from the DNA of an ancient extraterrestrial species. Dragons, we called them, though they were nothing so primitive as our myths suggest. You're the only successful subject, the only one who survived the complete integration. You belong in our program." Lyra's response was a surge of flame that forced even Thorn to retreat. The commander backed away, still speaking, still trying to assert control. "We'll find you again," he promised. "Your genetic signature is unique. You can't hide forever." Taking advantage of the standoff, Kale had dragged himself to the maintenance tunnel entrance. Pain radiated from his leg where a ricocheting bullet fragment had struck him, but the wound wasn't severe enough to prevent escape. "Lyra," he called. "Now." While they're afraid. For a moment, she seemed lost in the power flowing through her, consumed by the opportunity for vengeance. Then her gaze found Kale, and something shifted in her expression. The flames around her diminished, though they didn't disappear completely. With graceful speed, she moved to Kale's side and helped him into the tunnel. Behind them, Thorn was shouting orders, regrouping his team, but it was too late. They vanished into the darkness of the Undercity, leaving only scorched earth and melted weapons as evidence of their passage. The Undercity was a world unto itself, a labyrinth of maintenance tunnels, abandoned subway lines, and forgotten infrastructure that ran beneath Neoviridia. Over generations, it had become home to those who couldn't or wouldn't live in the gleaming metropolis above, the dispossessed, the fugitive, those who valued freedom over comfort. Kale and Lyra moved deeper into this subterranean realm. Her newly manifested wings folded awkwardly against her back, causing her visible discomfort. The revelation of her true nature, an alien species, weaponized through genetic engineering, hung between them, unaddressed in the urgency of their flight. Eventually, they found temporary sanctuary in an abandoned metro station. The vast, cathedral-like space had been transformed into a makeshift settlement by the Undercity's inhabitants. Dilapidated shelters filled the platform, and jury-rigged lighting cast long shadows across crumbling tiles. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. The residents, a diverse collection of outcasts, regarded the newcomers with suspicious eyes, particularly Lyra with her inhuman features. But in the Undercity, questions were rarely asked directly, and unusual appearances were common enough. An elderly woman approached them, noting Kale's injury. Her face was mapped with wrinkles, her hair a wild tangle of gray, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. "You're running from something," she stated flatly. "Something that would interest the rest of us in avoiding." Kale nodded weakly, fighting against the pain in his leg. "Aegis Corp, he admitted. They want her." The woman's expression darkened at the corporation's name. "Aegis," she spat. "Those butchers have caused enough grief down here over the years." She gestured to two young men nearby. "Help them to my quarters. The one with the injury needs tending." The residents complied without question, helping Kale while giving Lyra a wide berth. They were led to a section of the station that had been converted into a surprisingly comfortable living space, partitioned from the main area by salvage materials. "I'm Mira," the old woman introduced herself as she examined Kale's wound. "Once upon a time, I was Dr. Miranda Chun, Chief Medical Officer at Neoviridia Central Hospital, before I learned too much about Aegis Corp's activities and became inconvenient." She cleaned and bandaged Kale's leg with practiced efficiency. "Not too bad. The fragment didn't hit anything vital. You'll heal given time and rest." She turned her attention to Lyra, who stood nervously in the corner, wings twitching. "And you, my dear, you're something quite extraordinary, aren't you?" Lyra remained silent, eyes downcast. "She needs help," Kale explained. "Those wings, they're new. They're causing her pain, and she needs to rest." She used a lot of energy fighting off the Aegis team. Mira approached Lyra carefully, hands raised to show she meant no harm. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the wings. After a moment's hesitation, Lyra nodded. Mira examined the wings with clinical precision, occasionally murmuring to herself. "Remarkable structure," she commented. "Not like any terrestrial organism I've ever seen. The musculature is compressed, still developing." She looked Lyra in the eyes. "They're growing. That's why they hurt. Your body is changing to accommodate them." She rummaged through her supplies and produced a salve. "This will help with the discomfort, and I can fashion a support harness that will reduce the strain until the muscles strengthen." As Mira worked, Lyra gradually relaxed, sensing the woman's genuine desire to help. When the improvised harness was in place, supporting the weight of the wings more evenly across her back, Lyra sighed with relief. "Thank you," she said softly. Mira smiled. "You're welcome, child. Now, both of you need rest. We can talk more when you've recovered your strength." In the days that followed, Kale and Lyra integrated into the strange community of the abandoned station. The residents, initially wary, became more accepting as they witnessed Lyra's gentle nature and Kale's willingness to contribute his engineering skills to their communal infrastructure. Mira became their primary ally and guide to undercity life. She had lived there for 15 years, establishing herself as both healer and elder to the scattered population. Her history with Aegis Corp made her particularly sympathetic to their situation. Aegis has been conducting illegal experiments for decades, she explained one evening over a simple meal in her quarters. I discovered evidence of human trials while treating workers from one of their facilities. When I raised concerns, I was discredited, threatened, and eventually forced to disappear. She looked at Lyra thoughtfully. But never in my worst imaginings did I suspect they had access to extraterrestrial biological material. Thorne called me Omega Prototype, Lyra said, her speech now significantly improved through constant practice. He said I was the only one who survived the complete integration. Mira nodded grimly. Chimera Project fits their naming conventions. In mythology, the Chimera was a creature composed of parts from different animals. They were trying to create human-alien hybrids, using you as a weapon. Kale, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke. We can't just keep running. Thorne was right about one thing. They'll find us eventually. Aegis has resources, influence. They'll tighten the net until we have nowhere left to hide. What alternative do we have? Mira asked. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Not confrontation, Kale said slowly, an idea taking shape. Exposure. Neo-Viridia's citizens know Aegis as a respected defense contractor. What if they learn the truth about Project Chimera? About what was done to Lyra and who knows how many others? Lyra straightened, her wings now stronger and more developed, shifting with interest. Make everyone know, she said, so they cannot hide anymore. It's not that simple, Mira cautioned. Aegis controls much of the city's communications infrastructure. Any conventional transmission would be blocked before it reached the public. But not all of it, Kale countered. I work for Nexus Corp. I know how the city systems are integrated. There are vulnerabilities, especially in the older networks that connect to the Central Plaza public displays. You're suggesting we hijack the largest media screens in Neo-Viridia? Mira looked, incredulous, then thoughtful. It would require access to a central data node. The closest one would be in the East Sector Maintenance Hub, which would be heavily guarded, Kale acknowledged, but not against someone who can generate enough heat to melt through security barriers. He looked at Lyra. She returned his gaze steadily. I will help. No more hiding. No more running. Their plan took shape over the following days. Mira reached out to trusted contacts throughout the Undercity, gathering intelligence on Aegis Corp's security patterns and the layout of the East Sector Hub. Kale worked tirelessly to develop a compact data package containing everything they knew about Project Chimera, including images of Lyra's wristband and testimony from her memories. Most crucially, they needed proof, something irrefutable that would prevent Aegis from dismissing their claims as fabrication. The answer came from an unexpected source. The band on your wrist, Kale realized one night, studying it for the 100th time. It's not just a control device. It's a data storage unit. That's why they want you back so badly. You're literally carrying their secrets with you. With careful work and Lyra's ability to control heat with microscopic precision, they managed to access the data without removing the band. What they found was more damning than they could have imagined. Detailed records of experimental procedures, genetic manipulation, and the systematic torture used to condition subjects for weaponization. The files included visual documentation that left no doubt about Aegis Corp's violations of every ethical standard and law governing scientific research. The night of their operation arrived with a rare meteorological event, a heavy storm that disrupted Neo-Viridia's usual weather control systems. Rain fell in sheets, providing additional cover for their approach to the East Sector Hub. Their team was small but determined. Kale, Lyra, Mira, and 2 Undercity residents with experience in security systems. They moved through maintenance passages and emergency exits, avoiding the main corridors where Aegis teams might be patrolling. Lyra had changed dramatically in the weeks since their escape. Her wings had fully developed, proportional to her body and strong enough for limited flight in enclosed spaces. She had mastered finer control of her abilities, able to generate heat ranging from a gentle warmth to an intense flame that could cut through metal. Most striking was her newfound confidence. She moved with purpose, no longer a frightened fugitive, but someone determined to expose the truth. They encountered the first security barrier at the entrance to the data node chamber. Reinforced door with biometric locks. Lyra stepped forward without hesitation, placing her hands against the control panel. Concentrated heat flowed from her palms, precisely targeted to overload the system without triggering emergency protocols. The door slid open, revealing a cavernous room filled with servers and monitoring stations. At the center stood the main access terminal, their target. "Quickly," Kale whispered, moving to the terminal. "We'll have minutes at most before the system registers the unauthorized entry." He connected their prepared data package while Lyra stood guard, senses alert for approach. Mira and the others monitored different entrances, communicating via short-range communicators. "Almost there," Kale muttered, fingers flying across the interface. "Once this uploads, it will broadcast across every public display in Central Plaza. Millions will see it before Aegis can shut it down." A soft alarm began to sound throughout the facility. "They know we're here." Myra's voice came urgently through the communicator. Security teams converging from multiple directions. Kale worked faster, overriding safeguards and authentication requirements. Just a few more seconds. The doors at the far end of the chamber burst open. Commander Thorne strode in, flanked by heavily armed Aegis operatives. His face twisted into a triumphant smile when he saw Lyra. "Predictable," he said coldly. "You think exposure will save you? Aegis Corp has weathered scandals before. We're too valuable to the city's defense infrastructure to be dismantled over a single project. However, unfortunate its methods." "This is more than a scandal," Kale retorted, still working. "This is proof of crimes against humanity and beyond." Thorne signaled his team to surround them. "Step away from the terminal. Now, or we'll be forced to take more aggressive measures." Lyra moved to stand between the Aegis team and Kale, wings partially extended, scales gleaming with reflected light. "You will not hurt him," she stated, heat beginning to shimmer around her. Thorne's smile didn't waver. "Always so protective. That was an unexpected trait in your development, one we plan to correct in the next phase." He raised a small device. "Did you think we wouldn't have countermeasures for your abilities? That band on your wrist may be damaged, but it's still connected to your nervous system." He pressed a button, and Lyra collapsed with a cry of agony, her body convulsing as electrical currents surged through her. The heat around her dissipated instantly. "Stop!" Kale abandoned the terminal, rushing to her side. "You're killing her." "Merely demonstrating who remains in control," Thorne replied, releasing the button. Lyra gasped for breath, trembling. "Now, step away from the terminal, or the next surge will be considerably less survivable." Kale looked from Lyra to the terminal, where the upload had reached 96%. Just a few more seconds. Understanding passed between them in a single glance. Lyra's hand gripped his, squeezing once. Then, with a speed that caught everyone by surprise, she lunged toward Thorne. The commander immediately activated the device again, sending Lyra crashing to the floor in pain. But her distraction had served its purpose. Kale sprinted back to the terminal, slamming his hand down on the final command sequence. "Upload complete," flashed across the screen. Throughout Neo-Viridia, the massive displays in Central Plaza flickered and changed. The usual advertisements and news feeds vanished, replaced by images that shocked viewers to silence. Documented evidence of Project Chimera, recordings of experiments, genetic data proving the manipulation of extraterrestrial DNA, and finally, footage of Lyra herself, both in captivity and free. In the data chamber, chaos erupted. Thorne, realizing what had happened, roared with rage and ordered his team to secure the terminal. But it was too late. The data was already propagating through the city's network, impossible to contain. In the confusion, Lyra found new strength. Despite the pain from the control device, she rose to her feet, eyes blazing golden. With a scream of defiance, she summoned a heat so intense that the metal band on her wrist finally yielded, warping and falling away from her flesh. Free from its influence, her power surged unchecked. Fire engulfed her form, not burning her but emanating outward in waves that forced everyone back. The Aegis team's weapons melted in their hands. Equipment throughout the chamber began to fail as circuits overheated. "Kale," Lyra called above the commotion. "We need to leave." He didn't need to be told twice. They retreated toward the exit where Mira waited, leaving Thorn and his team to contend with failing systems and the public relations catastrophe already unfolding across the city. Their escape through the Undercity was a blur of narrow passages and helping hands. The community that had sheltered them now ensured their safe passage to the outskirts of Neo-Viridia, where they could vanish beyond the city surveillance network. Days later, they watched news feeds from a safe distance. The fallout was everything they had hoped for and more. Aegis Corp's stock had collapsed. Government investigations had been launched. Thorn and other key executives had been taken into custody. Project Chimera had been exposed in all its horror, prompting outrage and calls for justice. Yet Kale and Lyra knew better than to believe their troubles were over. Corporations like Aegis had deep roots and powerful allies. There would be attempts to rebuild, to salvage valuable research, perhaps even to recapture the asset that had escaped. "What will you do now?" Mira asked them on the morning of their departure. They had taken refuge in an abandoned research station on the edge of what had once been a national park, now a recovering wilderness zone beyond Neo-Viridia's borders. Lyra looked to the sky, her wings strong and fully formed, capable now of true flight. "Learn who I am," she answered. "What I can become without their chains." Kale nodded, watching her with a mixture of pride and something deeper that had grown between them through shared danger and trust. "And I'll help her. There must be others like Lyra out there. Other experiments, other victims. They deserve freedom too." Mira smiled knowingly. "I thought as much. That's why I brought you these." She handed them small communicators. "You're not alone in this fight. The Undercity network extends further than you know. When you're ready, when you find others who need help, reach out." Their goodbyes were brief but heartfelt. As Mira departed to return to her community, Kale and Lyra stood at the threshold of a new chapter. "Are you ready?" Kale asked, shouldering his pack. Lyra stretched her wings fully, their span impressive against the morning light. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. Together, that evening, as the sun set over the recovering wilderness, Lyra took flight for the first time in true freedom. She soared above the trees, her form silhouetted against the dimming sky, scales catching the last golden rays like stars fallen to earth. Kale watched from below, his heart full, with the journey that had brought them here and the uncertain path ahead. He had found a starving alien dragon girl in the junkyard and chosen to save her. That choice had changed everything. For her, for him, for Neo-Viridia, and perhaps for others still waiting to be freed. As darkness fell, Lyra descended, landing beside him with growing grace. Her eyes still held that otherworldly violet and gold, but now they also held something undeniably human. Hope. "Tomorrow," she said, "we begin," and together they would.